There are plenty of folks in Europe who will look at American elections and scoff at the success of populists and celebrities. Latvia historically doesn't have much ground to stand on, though, having spent the 90s getting our favorite movie stars and composers into government, moving on to strongmen, radio hosts, and anyone that offers some moolah. Perhaps the most beautiful culmination of our populist endeavors thus far, coming with the formation, rise, and implosion of KPVLV. My name is Walter, and welcome to Politics Far From Home, where we'll see just how the heck that happened. Latvia doesn't have the longest history under democracy. We're talking 14 years prior to becoming a dictatorship in the interwar period, and our current parliamentary system has only existed since 1993. When it came to electing our first parliaments, there was a certain sense of cluelessness to it, leaving little surprise in much of the power returning to Soviet-era political figures, oligarchs, and celebrities. Among some prominent political figures in the 90s and early 2000s, you'll find the likes of Raimons Pauls, a famous composer who composed countless movie soundtracks and concert albums, whose birthday became something of a national event and holiday, and who, during his last two tours in Saima, spoke once in total and did goddamn nothing. There's also, for example, the actress Olga Dreja, among others, countless opera singers, composers, conductors, strongmen, and more. Some of them were also fairly well liked as politicians. For example, Raimons Bergmanis, one of the strongest men in the country, wound up being our defense minister, and Ingmars Līdeka, despite being a TV presenter and charismatic nature man, was also a fairly competent and professional politician. Over time, though, political analysts have pointed out that the appeal has died out and fewer celebrities make the attempt to transition into politics. Familiar faces have been replaced with comforting and fiery rhetoric in the populist arsenal, which well and truly saw its climax in the 2018 elections. These were the first elections little old me took part in, since I and my whole class had just turned 18. This was also my first time using the LSM party sorter, and trying to understand what parties I aligned with. Topping the list were Development 4, New Unity, and Progressives, and of the three, Development 4 seemed like the most likely to succeed, which proved to be correct, and so they got my vote. Which made some people in an earlier video think they're the party that currently has my support, which was certainly amusing. I literally only voted for them just the one time. Anyhow, something caught my eye during that survey. For Saima elections, LSM usually makes it so you can see not only which party agendas you agree with, but which personal opinions held by specific members of those parties line up with yours. Now, near the top, you had parties like the ones I mentioned, plus some members of the newcomer party, KPVLV. Then, at the very bottom at the time, I saw members of parties such as the Latvian-Russian Union, some small parties of the year like Foreign Alternative, and also KPVLV. Which really makes you scratch your noggin, doesn't it? I mean, how would a party function when its members are so diametrically opposed to each other in terms of opinion? We'd come to find out soon enough, as KPVLV rocketed to second place in the election, just behind the still dominant Harmony, in what would come to be one of the biggest party clusterfucks in modern Latvian history. Where did this party come from? Well, its founder, spokesperson, and face of the party was Artūrs Kaimiņš. Prior to the election, he was a popular radio and podcast host for a show called Doghouse, known for bringing in various politicians and conducting one-on-one interviews with them. He still does that, by the way, and I've kind of set a personal goal of catching up to his view and subscriber count thanks to this series. He had been a member of the Latvian Region Union since 2014, though he had left in 2015, remaining an independent member of Saima. His popularity amongst voters inspired him to create his own party in 2016 called Who Owns the Country, shortened to KPVLV, along with the help of a lawyer and henceforth fellow politician, Aldis Gobzems. Although in broad strokes the party did have some principles, being anti-corruption, pro-taxpayer, and in favor of bringing in new blood to politics, none of that amounted to a consistent ideology within the party's ranks. It also didn't help that it became apparent very quickly to those who paid attention just how much of what the party promised was lip service. Both Kaimiņš and Gobzems being on record talking about not cooperating with the ruling mafia and desiring to build a coalition of new parties and new deputies against the old, but leading up to the election in September, there was a leak of a phone conversation recorded by Kaimiņš himself, for some reason, revealing that the two of them had long since discussed the need to work with the old mafia parties in question, if their own party made it into power. This is also where that cutlet meme came from in the earlier video. To reiterate, that leak happened on the run-up to the election, and yet their voters seem to have more or less said, yeah, I kinda do just want the cutlet, and got them the number 2 spot anyhow. To put it in perspective what we're about to discuss, the recent coalition for Riga's Duome, as mentioned last video, took less than 2 weeks to fully form. In the current Saima, despite changes down the line, the first coalition formed in 3 weeks. The coalition, after the election of the 13th Saima in 2018, took 109 days to form a government. Over 3 months of effectively the country having no functional government. What the hell happens? 7 parties had made it into Saima, with 3 parties going from 0 seats in it to taking spots number 2, 3, and 4. KPVLV, the Young Conservatives, and Development 4. All 3 then had the opportunity to form a ruling coalition and government, and yet they couldn't. For a start, 2 parties were instantly excluded from considerations by the majority, namely Harmony and the Union of Greens and Farmers. That still left 5 parties to form the coalition, the 3 mentioned as well as National Union and New Unity. The Young Conservatives were first to try and form a government. And here it's worth mentioning that forming it on a country level involves a division of ministries, which ended up the greatest hurdle. They had the president's blessing, this was Väyun's by the way, to try and form a government until mid-November, which they failed to do and blamed old oligarchic parties for. They still wanted to be in coalition and government with those parties, though. By the end of November, the president had picked his next candidate for forming the government, Aldis Guobzems, the PM candidate from KPVLV. This was a choice doomed for failure from the get-go. A party which had been openly hostile to existing political blocs, with a man whose political reputation had recently been tarnished by the calls leaking, not to mention the party being internally far too divided. Eventually, and we're really talking eventually here, the party ended up helmed by Krišjānis Kariņš, our unintentional meme lord PM, all the way in January, from the New Unity Party. Although the process of actually forming the government then only took 2 weeks. And here again we see the non-party nature of KPVLV, where a portion of the party voted against the government and a portion voted in favor of it. I once again remind you of what we talked about with coalitions in the last video. If it's a big old problem when a coalition doesn't vote the same way on things, when a party can't even agree on a vote, then it's gotten real rough. Now that government coalition was, on a technical level after that point, the most functional government we've had since Latvia regained its independence, as it never needed to massively reshuffle or change minister seats. This was somehow accompanied, however, by the implosion of Harmony in opposition after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and KPVLV's implosion after, well, to be honest, it just kind of did that on its own. A good sign that your party is not going to stand the test of time might be when both your founder and prime ministerial candidate, yep, that's Kariņš and Guobzems, get kicked from the party. In total, the party started their time in Saima with 16 seats, and ended it under a different name with only 5. And to reiterate one last time just how stupid this party's composition was, here's a short list of just some of the people who left the party and where they went. Linda Liepiņa, now a member of LPV. Karina Sprūde, now a member of Sovereign Power. Dīdzis Šmits, elected most recently from United List and currently in the Green Party. The late Aldis Blumbergs, who joined New Unity. Jānis Vitenbergs, National Union. Kaspars Ģirģens, one of the founding members of Republic, which is a party initially made by the head of Harmony. Wowee, Walter, it sounds like the people involved really went on to parties on every end of the political spectrum, huh? Yeah, they did! How did this party even assemble? Kariņš spent much of his time in government and after his tenure in looming threat of legal trouble. He was apprehended on suspicions of party financing corruption in 2018, but was also accused of false bookkeeping in 2020, which he was convicted of in 2023, and made to do community service, which he has since tried to refute, and that trial is still ongoing. Guobzems, meanwhile, went on his own little populist epoch, creating the party Law and Order, which formed from a few now out-of-party members in Saima, including one Yulia Stepanenko. The party was centrist in regards to economics, conservative in values, and a bit all over the place in rhetoric, but still leagues above KPVLV in consistency. One of the most hilarious things about Głobzims to me is a clip that shows up when you look his name up on YouTube where he says he has excellent reputation. And I mean, good lord, even his own voters wouldn't have made that claim. Getting kicked from his own party, going on to post about how COVID restrictions and vaccinations are equivalent to the plight of the Jews during World War II, so no huge surprise that members of his own party would dip, including Stepanenko, who joined LPV before being one of the leading formers of sovereign power. When a slightly schizo, pro-Russian conspiracy theorist thought you went too far, you probably did. The party, renamed afterwards to For Every Man and Woman, didn't pass the 5% bar in the most recent Saeima election. Głobzims took responsibility of that and left the party, and it has since renamed itself to Platform 21, rebranded itself as a modern centrist party, and ran in a Duame election with a list entirely made up of women for a feminist approach. This continues the long-standing KPVLV tradition of nothing making any sense ever. And there you have it. In somewhat broad strokes, that's the whole tale of KPVLV, Artus Kaimiņš, and Aldis Głobzims. Start to finish. LPV have sort of taken on KPVLV's mantle, but only time will tell if they'll ever see as much success in national elections. This has been Politics Far From Home, and I'll see you next time. Ciao.